Welcome to this video on what is the true self, what is the egoic and false self, part 1, enjoy. Most of us, including myself, live within the idea of what we have created as our reality, our personality, who we see ourselves as, who we project ourselves as out into the environment, including who we project the ideas that we project onto other people and our reality in general. That is the ego, that's the false self. And what we truly need to do is start to realize where the ego is in our lives, where that false self is manifesting, and to start to break that down and come back to the root of who we are, the core of who we are, which is what we would call our true self. And our true self is, in essence, everything that the false egoic self isn't. And if we're going to find the core of who we are, we have to realize what we aren't, which is the hardest part of this discovery. Because it's breaking down those old barriers, breaking down those old ways of life, and realizing that those are actually all patterns of a reality in which we are living out and playing out. So I'm here, I've been in India for the past couple of weeks, because for me, I'm on my own part of my spiritual journey, and there's different reasons which I might go into making another video of why I'm in India. But what I feel I am drawn to at this point in my life is exploring that nexus of where the false self and the true self meets, and helping people to break down those barriers of the old false idea of who we are. So I just wanted to give you a couple of different ways in which we can realize what the false self is, and allow us to take one step closer to the true self. Who you understand yourself to be, okay? My name is Blake. I am 32 years old. I was born in Cornwall. I was born to my mum, Amanda, my father, Michael, and I grew up. I went to a couple of different schools, one primary school, one secondary school. I then went to college. Throughout that growing up, I met lots of different friends, had a lot of different experiences. And throughout this growing up, I built an identity of who I was. And the first step of what that identity was, which was basically put upon me, was my name. And that name creates a projection in your reality of your form, of who you are. And that name in and of itself carries energy. It does carry an importance, but the idea is that we actually project our identity around that name more so than what we should be doing. Beyond our name, we start to break down our reality, which is with how we are separating our reality from one person to the other. So we start to learn language, and we start to learn I, and we start to create the separation between the perception of our awareness of who we are. So as soon as we create the word I and you, we start to create a separation within the material sense, within the physical reality that we are perceiving, okay? And that I and you and we, etc., us, all starts to help us form our reality. But in helping us form our reality and navigate physical reality, it starts to create a separation from our true self and who we understand ourselves to truly be. Because when we're born, we are pure essence. We are that soul that has come down to experience, yes, this physical existence, but we are the pure essence that is just experiencing and witnessing the material physical world in the experience that is just playing out before us. And it is us that is growing up. It is us that is growing into the experience as it unfolds, that we start to define form in more and more structured ways. And of course, that has a lot of benefit because we have to be able to navigate our lives here. We have to be able to navigate our existence to function, to give purpose to our actions, to be able to move forwards with right purpose or wrong purpose, however you want to experience and play out this life. And this separation and this identification with form doesn't obviously stop there, because then as we grow and as we go through school, as we meet other people, as our family start to inform our identity, we start to realize that, or we start to learn that there are other ways in which we are starting to mold our identity. And that comes through our nationality. It comes through all the projections that our family then start to put upon us. If you come from a family that is very wealthy, then they're going to give off those wealthy vibes, not only just through the way in which they live and they spend their money, but also through the words that they would use, the way in which they express themselves to other people and into their environment. And that ultimately starts to express itself and leave an impact onto you. Sorry, distracted by a beautiful bird. And that that expression and that imprint starts to define your patterns. It starts to create the patterns. Obviously, it's slightly debatable in terms of the ages in which that critical age in which we are impacted in terms of our how our patterns are learnt. They say from 0 to 7, 0 to 9, somewhere around that age. But those vital ages of which we are just learning how to literally just be within the physical world are the defining patterns for the rest of our lives. And it's up to us to be able to break them down, to realize them for what they are, to witness them for what they are, and to start to dissolve the false limitations and realize what is lying underneath. And to give you a couple more examples, because I'm struggling to think of them right now. But they're all around us, from the way in which the clothes that we choose, okay, and our preferences of the type of people that we like to be around, the way in which we choose to express ourselves. If our family were very loving or perhaps not so loving, will determine how we engage in our environment and how we engage with other people as well. And that all works to build up this personality of who we would call ourselves to be. A lot of this might not be, a lot of people will know this, but it's in the small things that we have to realize first that help us to start to build up the image of the false self. understanding that, it starts with who you understand yourself to be. Because that understanding is ultimately coming from the false sense of self. Not for everyone, because ultimately when we start to do the work to break that down, we see what lies underneath and through and around. The false self, the egoic self, is like I always envisage it as a cloud of lies, essentially, that sit over the top of our true self, our true expression of who we are. And it is that journey of recognizing the ego, placing it, realizing that the boundaries of the ego, of who we've built ourselves to be, is quite strong boundaries, but as soon as we start to challenge them, the ego is quite good in its own way of being able to change and shift those boundaries. So that as much as you might start to do the work to go, okay, I am here and I realize that my given name is Blake, but I understand that on a deeper, more conscious and spiritual level, that my identity doesn't have a name. It goes beyond that. But for the purpose of this physical existence, I have this given name. And as soon as you start to do the work to realize some of these things, our ego, which is very, very clever in its own way, will start to weave its own juju to redefine the boundaries. I'm trying to think of a example here, because ultimately it's realizing that our thoughts are not our own as well. This is an important aspect of realizing how we can start to break the boundaries of the ego, realizing that our thoughts are not our own. And thoughts basically exist in and of themselves because they have been created. This is going to be a bit out there for some people, and we don't have to go into it. You can take it with a pinch of salt, but just understand that the thoughts exist, okay? In our consciousness, in its pure state, when it starts to use the mind, even in its more natural state, away from the evolved, unbalanced ego, will start to separate form for the purpose of navigating this reality, as I said earlier. Now, if I look next to me, I have this tree, okay, and I can start to attract a load of different thoughts to me about my experience of this tree as I am perceiving it. And I might go, tree, as a thought. Or I might go, that is a beautiful tree, as a thought. Or, that tree looks horrible and spiky, etc., etc. I can attract hundreds of different thoughts all about this one object and how I feel about it, how I'm, the thoughts that I'm having, and I can start to create and mold my reality around this tree. And to go one step further in this, if, for example, when you were younger and your family said, oh, trees are horrible, we need to burn them all down to the ground, they just ruin the back garden, I got rid of all of them, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden you've got this expression of, trees are not good, blah, 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 blah. And it's from this expression that you will have that projected onto you that, trees aren't good. And then in school, you will learn that actually trees help give us life, give us the air that we breathe. And, excuse me, and you then start to have a conflict of perception, a conflict of reality. And what that will do is then perhaps it will broaden your reality. And you might even have both of those living in existence. The trees are not very nice, but they do help us to live. Or you might realize that, this is actually one person's expression of reality, one person's perception of reality compared to another view of reality. And the way in which these thoughts, just to come back to where I was going, the way in which these thoughts actually start to affect our reality is when you've got both of those ideas. Trees are not good, trees are wonderful. They will affect not just the way in which you are projecting your reality, but the way in which that projection affects your reality. And that's just one example, but you can start to create massive limitations. And obviously you can see this expressed within the patterns that we have around wealth and abundance, around being able to step out into what you truly want to do, perhaps around being shy, around not being able to speak your truth. Whatever it is, these patterns come out from what is projected upon us, and the experience that we then take in, and also the experience that we go through that we go through an experience, perhaps we trip up on a rock at some point, and when we trip up on that rock, when we are younger, and we realize that the world isn't as safe as what we thought it was. Perhaps this was a very, very hard rock. Perhaps you were barefoot at the time, and it left that imprint onto you that you have to be careful. And from that time on, when you were younger, then you started to change your perception of your reality to fit around the image of what you had created, because that was such an emotional, a physical, emotional, provoking experience. You then created the thoughts around it, you created the patterns around it, and perhaps you didn't resolve the emotional trauma around that as well, to be able to release it and recognize that actually no, it was an experience of what it was in the moment. And then when we start to build those patterns of that experience, when you start to say nature is not actually that friendly, then you start to form your projected reality, which is still part of the ego, and then you start to draw in more experiences of a similar nature. So if that happened to you when you were 2 years old, and then you started, even if you don't remember them, but over the years you started to have similar experiences where no matter where it was outside in nature, but you started to give out that fear response, and then you would attract similar experiences to compound that first experience that you had. That's how we build those patterns in our lives. So it takes a lot to break that down. It takes a lot to go through and to realize those patterns for what they are, because ultimately, just to circle back round to the thoughts, if you can't separate the idea of your thoughts belonging to you and the thoughts just existing, then you ultimately can't start to separate that sense of identity that you have created. Because if you believe yourself to be Blake, I wonder if there's any Blakes that are going to be watching this in the future, but if you believe yourself to be Blake and nothing more than Blake, then you will not perceive a reality that is anything more than your perception of yourself. But as soon as you start to dissolve that as soon as you start to witness, perhaps I am something greater than Blake. Perhaps I am something greater than I have let myself believe myself to be. That's when the deeper experiences can start to come in. Ultimately, when we go through spiritual awakenings, those awakenings, I'm trying to think of any example here where an awakening does not challenge the boundary of who you thought yourself to be. That is a spiritual awakening, because you are awakening up from the slumber of who you thought you were into something greater, even if you do not understand in that moment in time what that greater part of you is that you experienced in that spiritual awakening. And for those perhaps who haven't seen any of my previous videos, I'm pretty sure I've done a video about spiritual awakenings. If not, I will revisit the subject anyway. We don't just have one spiritual awakening and then become awakened. Ultimately, that is just awakening into another identity, another form of the ego. Well, I mean, for the most of us, there is obviously certain examples in history, certain avatars in which their awakening perhaps allow them to step into a true awakening of their true self and to dissolve all the boundaries of their ego. But ultimately, it takes the majority of us a very long time to do the work necessary to break down all aspects of our ego. I know I started off the video saying with what is the true self here, but to understand the true self, we have to break down and understand the ego first. That's the only way in which we can get to the true, because it is that objective displacement of our identity that we can start to witness who we are not and leave what is to be realized and witnessed. So I hope that gives you an idea about how we can start to do, how we can start to see who it is we truly are. And I know I haven't necessarily gone into the true self, but hopefully that recognition of what the ego is, even just a little bit, has helped you create some form of break. Even if you don't realize it on the surface, in the logical aspect of your brain, you know there's something that's working behind the scenes, something deeper, which perhaps is your true self, which is allowing you to create some form of space of separation to witness the ego. And just before I leave, just to reinforce the idea, we cannot witness the ego for what it is when we are deep in the identity of what the ego and the false self is. That is why it is so important to create breaks. So I urge you to do the work on the ego itself, do the work to realize the way in which it crops up. There are so many books out there. I am releasing my own book very shortly. I've just finished the final draft. It's called The Psychic and the Self. And it's all about psychic development and self-development and how interlinked those two are. I'm also releasing a community platform in the coming future, which will help us dive into that relationship of our true self and the ego, and to allow us to come back to that innate truth and the true essence of who we are. And there will be a lot to do with that platform coming soon. So thank you very much if you've made it to the end of this video. My mouth is eternally dry. The sun is beating down. I'm loving it, but I am still adjusting to this Indian climate. And yeah, I will see you in the next video where we shall journey further into the true self and the relationship of the ego. Thank you and biggest blessings. Have a good day.